ladies and gentlemen, it's time for BIA Kelsey Live, our weekly discussion of local media and marketing. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. I'm a senior analyst for local on-demand economic business at BIA Kelsey, and I'm joined today by Abid Chaudhry, senior analyst, and Mike Boland, chief analyst at BIA Kelsey. And as every week, we're going to be talking about this week's news in local media and marketing. And want to jump in right away, guys. First off, Facebook introduced a wide range of new local community marketplace enablement services, everything from recommendation sharing to the ability to schedule a professional appointment to getting food delivered through delivery.com. What's this mean? Does this mean Yelp, Fandango, and Thumbtack are all out of business? Is Facebook the overwhelming leader in this space now? What would you say? Throw it to you, Mike, and tell me about what your thoughts are.
Sure. So a few things happening here. So one, Facebook is continuing to kind of eat the web, as we say, and create more of a walled garden so you can do everything there and never leave. And this is an ongoing theme, an ongoing progression for Facebook, and this is just the latest step. So no huge surprises. But number two, it's also the continued development of pages and courting small businesses to make their Facebook page their primary online presence. So it now has about 50 million SMB pages, 4 million of which are paid. And that gives Facebook the greatest penetration of SMB advertisers of anyone else out there. And it's been able to accomplish that by two ways. One is by, simplicity and onboarding users, and everyone has kind of a comfort level with Facebook from using it in their personal lives, so it's not that much of a mental leap to then use it with your business as well. But I think more importantly, and back to what they've announced today, is more action buttons for users to transact directly. So that provides more kind of tangible ROI for small businesses. And I've predicted many times that this is coming because they've already done a good job with buy buttons and buttons to call a business. So this really brings more dimension to the offering, such as, book a service appointment through MyTime or food delivery through delivery.com. And in this case, partnering to bring that in kind of makes sense with those best of breed providers as opposed to starting from scratch. So that was one part of what they announced, and really the kind of business facing aspect of it. They also announced from a user facing aspect that you can get better recommendations through Facebook. So it's like, we've all been there when you type in like, hey, I'm going to Cleveland and I'm looking for a good gastropub. And instead of just waiting for your friends to answer it, to text that you're looking for a recommendation, and it'll automatically feed you stuff from the social graph to kind of answer that question. And I kind of have mixed feelings there. I think that, it's still somewhat out of context within Facebook for a lot of people to treat it as like a search utility. Like, yes, we've all kind of done that, like asked for advice from our kind of social graph. But I think that, it's still, I see personally, and I know a lot of people do this, still see Facebook as more of a place to go see like pictures of my drunk friends, not pictures to find that gastropub in Cleveland. And I think that, besides that like persona issue that Facebook's trying to convince the world to see it as a utility, number two, it doesn't yet have the search index in that walled garden, even though it's a huge walled garden, to kind of answer obscure questions. And, especially to the degree that Google can do so with like a 3 trillion page index. So I think it's a matter of sample size and index, and then also persona. I think it's cool, but I'm still a little skeptical it's going to be used like en masse.
I think you need local news to drive those kinds of conversations so that you have something to react to, not simply to rate something that you just purchased. A lot of people want to see that as part of a bigger conversation, and their lack of local news might be Facebook's biggest challenge at this point. So what do you think? I mean, Abid, you just bought tickets to Roger Waters while we were waiting to begin the show. Would you do that through Facebook and then share and tell everybody you're going to be there and what seat you're going to go to?
Well, I mean, so there's already a part of that taking place right now with the way Facebook does integrations with apps. There is an app called Bands in Town that literally does exactly that, but you have to plug into it. But, I mean, I think what's happening here, and from what Mike said, and I kind of agree with him, Facebook's overarching universal goal is to sort of become the layer of the internet for the majority of humans out there, that they think this is the way to get to the internet. It's turning into America Online, basically, but in massive scale. But exactly. In wanting to do that, and in wanting to sort of tap in more into the local level, it makes sense for them to do these community integrations. And I think, Mike brings up a point that's sticks out to me, which is that Facebook went through a process to pick out the apps and the vendors and the services that it's working with, whether it's MyTime, whether it's Delivery.com. And that makes a really interesting sort of wall immediately be placed between the rest of the local community in terms of, some of the other folks that are out there like Booker instead of MyTime. And then the folks that are actually getting access to this Facebook community. And what it makes me wonder is this going to be sort of a trend that in time we'll start to see other services be able to get on to this platform as well? Or is this going to be preferential treatment by Facebook?
Well, I think it's going to be difficult for Facebook to maintain its relationships and built-in relationship with a number of other partners, Google, Microsoft, Apple. All of these companies are looking to provide their own set of services within their own walled gardens, and those walls are starting to, run into one another. Do you see this as a barrier to consumer adoption at some point? People will start to pick what the phones they buy based on the silo they will be in within the walled garden.
I honestly think consumers are stampeding into the way that Facebook wants them to interact with the world, and I think that all of this is really moot when it comes to the way consumer behavior is, and unless they make you do something completely different in terms of the flow for how Facebook users interact with Facebook and the universe of Facebook apps. I think one of the directions where this might go is that Facebook might start to come up with a monetization model where they can work with these ticket folks. They can work with these apartment booking sites to take a little bit of a little piece of the percentage of each transaction that's completed through the actual service that's being done through Facebook. And that's a great way for them to get away from the App Store model, but at the same time utilizing the exact structure for an entirely different service model, which in this case, it's what you and I have been calling service. Is it
service commerce?
Service commerce. That's the one. Yeah, that's right. And I think that's kind of the direction this is going in.
But I agree that they'll turn on that monetization switch at some point in terms of like a rev share or something or affiliate fees. And at this point, I think they're sacrificing that just for sheer growth and just to build up that network. And then once they have that in place, it'll be a more compelling value proposition for others to say, yeah, I'll pay to be part of that.
It's going to be interesting, though, to see how the on-demand companies like Delivery.com react to that when their margins are already being pressed because people are pushing back on the 20% share that they receive, or so it's going to be very difficult to for some of those companies to survive once that rev share turns on, perhaps.
Yep.
Good point.
Okay, so let's move on to the second one. And this has to do with our own local Commerce Monitor survey. It's a survey we've been doing for the past 20 years. So we just got Wave 20 back. And one of the findings that was highlighted by our colleague Rick Ducey on the blog recently is that very small businesses, the companies, in fact, that we were just speaking about using Facebook potentially, are actually not embracing the web. Only 40.3% of the businesses that we surveyed last year have a website, or the very small businesses have a website. The other 60% are starting to migrate to Facebook. They're using Google or other platforms to be seen and found, but they're driving those to listings and to call services and other things that convert into direct revenue rather than spending the money to build a web presence, to drive people to using SEO and all the other normal steps that we have established as an industry. So as these small businesses migrate online, and we know they must in order to survive, it looks like they're going to skip the website. Just as a bit of context, we found that on average, the businesses that are using websites are spending $1,761 a year on that service, which is a lot of money for a very small business. By contrast, they could start on Facebook for $50 a month, probably. Is this an indication that a lot of people will never have a web presence, that they will have a presence only through one of these silos? And will it be necessary for them to be in all the silos in order for them to market effectively? And if this becomes just a different multi-channel challenge in terms of marketing, what do you think, Ab?
I think we need to, to answer your question, I think, yes, according to the way that currently people think about presence, I do feel that there's going to be a certain percentage of small businesses that are simply just not going to have it, whether it's their own domain name, or it's some GoDaddy hosted service type of thing. But I think really what needs to be taking place in the next a year or 2-3 years from now, or in just the conversation happening right now, is a definition change around what presence even means. Right. I mean, we're moving into this paradigm where we're no longer thinking about presence in terms of the way we used to with desktop, where you've got to have a www of some sort. Now, presence can actually be something along the lines of having an Instagram account that is appropriately, posting and getting attention from a local, area for whatever, like a bike shop for whatever, or example. And I think that that's the bigger question that we need to start to think about when it comes to approaching small businesses is, all right, well, look, what does presence mean to you, right? And then use that as the basis to then go around and figure out what is the appropriate sort of response to it, whether it's a Facebook page, whether it's, a social media presence, et cetera, and not just necessarily worry about, do we have website presence?
So to go back to the first item about Facebook pages, and to expand on a point I made then, the simplicity factor is something it's been an axiom in local forever. Keep it simple, stupid, blah, blah, blah. But, Facebook's really the only one to live true to that. The previously kind of poster child of simplicity and self-serve was Google AdWords, and it's actually not that easy. And tying back to websites, even the more kind of simple tools out there now, like Squarespace. I just built a Squarespace website for myself, and it actually wasn't that simple and user-friendly. The comparison is Facebook, where, again, small businesses are so comfortable with it from using it in their personal life that it's not much of a mental leap, and their onboarding process for creating a page is dead simple. You can do it in like a half an hour, and it's that plus the kind of the presence of having an active account and presence on things like Instagram works for a lot of verticals like restaurants or visually oriented stuff. So I think it's a combination of things. It's the things that Rick pointed out in his blog post, such as cost and complexity. I think the average cost was above $1,000 for certain websites, but then also the complexity, as I mentioned, and the presence of these other easier options. I think that's the answer.
So ease of use is one of the things that we see in the survey too. People are 60%, actually 61% of the people who responded, very small businesses, said that it needs to be easier to use. Are they opting for small, easy to use parts of the functionality that they'll ultimately need to combine in order to manage their business, or is the direction to go in the way that Facebook is, which is to build a platform which does a wide range of things and to plug in there. I think you're going to want to be on multiple walled gardens, and I'm stunned that we're having this conversation again 20 years after it the first time.
That's what I was about to say, was that it's crazy that we're having this conversation again, because we literally go through this every few, like when I first got into the industry, it was all about getting away from platform and getting into point solutions that were, able to be put into the bundles that they needed to have for small businesses. And now the trend, and I think rightfully so, the trend is going back towards platform. And I think what's changed, and I think what's going to, what SMBs are probably going to want is what you said, Mitch, which is they're going to want to be in multiple walled gardens, so that way they can get access to as many places as possible. But the question then becomes, well, how do you make the decision around, who gets to do my, my payroll management that feeds into my e-commerce, which feeds into my presence? Like, there's 3 different vendors perhaps in that situation, right? So that's something where I think the big dogs, the Intuits, the GoDaddies of the world, the YPs of the world, are making a play to try to make it more platform oriented, and then have small businesses sort of tailor to that message.
Sounds like a long,
that brings back the service
long road to integration, though.
Absolutely, and Abid, that brings back the service commerce. If you can have a one-stop solution that takes care of your booking system and your reservations and your, employee payroll in addition to your marketing, we're certainly seeing a trend towards that.
Well, so let's turn to the last story, because that is very much what this is about. 2 on-demand companies in the mental health and healthcare space have, in the last week, raised more than $50 million in funding. One of them, Heal, at getheal.com, is a company we featured on stage at BIA Kelsey Now back in June of 2015. And Nick Desai, the CEO there, has really done a great job of doing the on-demand house call business. He's building a genuinely caring business where physicians are excited about going out and providing health care in the home. And on the other end, Talkspace is essentially a therapy on-demand service, which could be delivered over the internet, or it could be delivered in person. And in both cases, scheduling, marketing, and so forth are all taken care of by the brand. And we would be expected to go looking for Heal to find our physician. Is that an extra layer of market adoption that they need to get people through, or do they just need to be everywhere? Is that Heal experience just going to be on Facebook and on Google and so forth, or is it right to be building a destination for this kind of service, for professional on-demand service?
Mike, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think so. I think yes, Mitch. I mean, I think as we learned from Uber and others, the name of the game with on-demand services is hyper growth to gain market share and users and kind of build that network effect. And I think this is also interesting because it follows a prediction I made at that very conference you cited, Mitch, where we had Nick Desai from Heal speaking. And one of the things that I mentioned was that, so far the on-demand economy, at least in terms of the workforce, has been what I call drivers and dry cleaning. And we're going to see that move up the professional ladder, and not just for kind of consumer reasons. And there's appeal in that model for things like, house visits for medical care and other things, and legal services, companies like Avo, but also in terms of the workforce itself. One of the things we've been looking at is that the on-demand economy, in terms of some of the flexible work advantages, appeals a lot to kind of millennial sensibilities. Now, millennial sensibilities, it doesn't reach the entire generation if it's just, again, drivers and dry cleaning. If it appeals to a greater swath of the professional workforce, and again, going up the ladder to higher-end professions in things like medicine, in things like graphic design, project-based work, a lot of these things, it's really going to... Marketing, right? It's going to start to grow because the supply side, the suppliers, the workers, I think are very in tune with this way of working, way of getting paid. But yet, like the on-demand economy so far has only appealed to the segment of that generation that is in that kind of lower end qualifications for kind of more kind of blue collar type work.
Well, it's interesting to watch how the doctors have responded, particularly to Heal. I haven't talked to a therapist using this.
A lot of them love it.
Yeah, but the doctors are, for them, it's a better way to get the experience with the patient than working in an emergency room. They're in the home. They get a real opportunity to do, to get to know the
and it's
patient
direct
and
patient
to do
care.
an interview.
It's direct patient care instead of like. I mean, my father's a physician, and one of the things he's complained a lot about over the last 20 years is the rise of insurance companies and HMOs, and more of his job is paperwork and business management as opposed to being a doctor and what he got it in it for. And with Heal, that kind of gives back to doctors that direct patient care as more of a share of their time if they're on that Heal network and doing it primarily. And I think that's one of the benefits too.
Well, the other thing is they are regulated, and my father happens to be a psychologist and has talked about the fact that you can't do this over state lines on the web, or at least you couldn't until very recently. Now you can. The professional services environment seems to me the next big wave of the adoption of on-demand. It's also going to change the way we market everything, because you will no longer need to have a whole bunch of people in one place to say, here's where you come to get this service. Instead, we can send it to you. That radically changes how we have to think about selling and engaging those people online and so forth. Does Facebook, for instance, get involved in managing your healthcare information so your doctor can reach out to you when you need a checkup, for instance? That's the kind of stuff I think. And going to the changes in consumer behavior we discussed earlier, Abid, do you think that people are ready for that they're comfortable with the idea that Facebook might be a channel for their medical care that we know Facebook harvests for information about their customers?
I mean, I think short answer is probably not. But in terms of just thinking about consumer sort of adoption to things like sending sensitive information over the web, it's already happening in a lot of different sort of capacities. And if you think about Google as an example, they had the Google Health Initiative a little while back that they tried to sort of kickstart, and they ran into things that were challenges around HIPAA compliance and making sure that you did have the right sort of regulations. But what I think is happening is now with like Heal or with sort of other sort of web-friendly, healthcare-related organizations. Like, so there's another one called One Medical Group, which is it's a brick-and-mortar medical practice that's completely online as well, and they're doing it, and they're doing well with it. And I think that for Facebook to do the kind of thing that you're talking about, I would see it more as becoming like a sales force that acts like as an infrastructure on top of which other services that contain that private information, for example, would send their own data, back and forth.
Well, so this is the destination question in another form. So Premera is doing Doctor on Demand too.
Right.
Do we go to Premera? Do we go to Heal? Yeah. Or do we expect those things to be in our environment in each of the walled gardens that we're talking about our consumers of the future living in? And that's a different marketing problem. If I can take advantage of the large number of people on Facebook to do discovery, but when I get intimate with them, maybe I do need to bring them behind some sort of branded wall where they know that they're in our relationship rather than a relationship with Facebook or Google.
Is this the same sort of structure as what we see with like streaming media, where it's like I can only watch The Man in High Castle on Amazon, and so therefore that's the service I use? Is that
There's an analogy. There's an analogy there.
Yeah.
And think about the power of the insurer, like we were talking about. Premera is an insurer. Is that the way they're going?
Right.
So a quick comment on the on-demand economy in general that kind of occurs to me, and I always think back to the Gartner hype cycle where it goes up and we had a period of a lot of excitement, and now we're in the next stage of that construct, which is the trough of disillusionment. And I think everyone rolls their eyes when you hear about on-demand companies, especially those getting funding. But then after that stage, it goes into this kind of period of kind of sustained and healthy growth, but not that insanity in the early stages. And I think that's kind of where we're entering with on-demand, and we're seeing some companies that will sustain and be healthy businesses, and Heal could be one of them. And I'm pretty bullish on the professional services aspect of on demand, and that could be one place that it has that kind of long-term sustainability. Even though again we're right now in that kind of trough of disillusionment where all of the excitement is now in kind of this hangover stage, and people roll their eyes when they hear about on-demand companies getting high valuations.
I haven't been through it 3 times now. I think this is when the serious work gets done.
Yep, we saw it with the deals craze of like 2010, 2011, and in much larger ones like e-commerce, which you're probably referring to, and much larger kind of
just the first commercial web. Yeah. I remember the first PC Mac networks, and that was the same challenge within the enterprise. You've got a bunch of Macs over there, a bunch of PCs over here. Do we connect them? And if we connect them, do we use something that is primarily PC friendly or Mac friendly? It was the same problem. It's just limited to smaller groups of people who had access to the technology at the time. But we continually repeat this cycle of disaggregating everything, doing point solutions, building up clusters of point solutions that become destinations in and of themselves. And this will happen again, I guarantee it, those walls will fall down as well, because they create inefficiencies between different environments that the consumer will notice and reject.
Right.
So it's a cycle we do. The funny little vicious that we are. Yeah. It is. Well, but in the Roger Waters sense, it's obviously all planned. And
it's all just a brick in the wall, dude. You know that.
That's right. So once again, we're done with the news and dead on with our half hour. Folks, we're practicing this as we go along, and we appreciate you listening as we develop our speaking strategies here online. But if you'd like to meet us in person, do be sure to join us at BIA Kelsey Next in Boston. It'll be happening in December on December 9th and 10th. And there's information at biakelsey.com about how to attend. And in the meantime, we'll be back next week. We have a guest next week, 2 folks from Yellcast, which is doing a very interesting demand casting trial in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So we'll be hearing more about them. They also happen to have spoken at BIA Kelsey Now in 2015 as well. So progress is continuing in that market. We're going to talk about that with them next week. In the meantime, that's Abid Chabri. That's Mike Boland. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. Thanks very much for listening, folks.